I'm going to come on to questions later. Okay, so the Register of Apprenticeship Training Providers. So again, we had a lot of information, again, came out on Tuesday around this, and this will be relevant, I think, probably to most people in the room in one way or another. What I'm going to cover is why we've got a new register, the different application routes that are available, what you need to think about if you're interested in applying for that, the application process, next steps and the timeline. I'd say all of the information I'm going to talk about now is available on gov.uk, and if you're interested in applying, you will need to look at the detail. I'm just going to cover the overview. Because we are in a procurement exercise as well, I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to take any questions that relate to that, because I can't obviously jeopardise that procurement. But hopefully that I will be able to give you enough so you understand what's available and where to go for further information. So the Register of Apprenticeship Training Providers, obviously this is new. It's for organisations in the future that want to get involved in delivering apprenticeship training. So any organisation that wants to draw down funds from an employer's digital account or from other government funding to deliver apprenticeships must be on the new register. There's no pass-through from the existing register of training organisations. And it provides assurance to both employers and government that actually the people that are getting funds that have been raised through the levy are fit organisations to deliver training. So obviously there's a due diligence process that the individual organisations will need to go through. Employers will also, of course, want to do their own checks as well. So if they want to deliver their apprenticeship programme, there will be other things that they will want to understand about capability of particular organisations, and they should do those checks too. The register also is for employers who want to deliver training to their own staff and want to draw down government funding from the digital account to be able to do that. So they will also need to go onto the register. And in terms of the criteria that we've got, we're setting a relatively high bar in terms of the quality of organisations that we want on the register, because obviously that's very important for everybody in the system, not least apprentices who are being trained, but obviously employers as well. Now, there are 3 application routes for the Register of Apprenticeship Training Providers. The main application route, one for employer and providers, and a supporting route. I'm going to come on in a moment to explain the detail of that. As an organisation, you apply for one route only. So one of the things you'll need to think about as an organisation, if you want to apply, is which is the most appropriate route for your particular circumstance. So in terms of the main application route, so this is for people who want effective training, wants to have flexibility to deliver any value of apprenticeship training. They want to be available for employers who are selecting providers through the digital apprenticeship service, so they will actually appear on the service for selection. But it could also be for a levy-paying employer who wants to train staff who are outside their own organisation, either in their supply chain or for apprentices in another organisation. And it's for those who have the capacity and the capability to deliver most of frameworks and standards that they offer. If you want to take part in the procurement, which is available for non-levy paying employers, you must go through the main application route. So you have to do 2 things in parallel: go through this main application route and also go through the procurement process as well. Going through the main application route also means you can operate as a subcontractor to another training provider if that's what you wish to do. So then for the employer-provider route, so this is for employers who want to provide training to their own staff and who are paying the levy. So if you're a non-levy paying employer, you can't use this particular route. And it's also for employers who want to act as a subcontractor to a main provider. So for example, if you were in a really specialised industry and you thought that only you could deliver some elements of the apprenticeship, you may want to go through this route so that you can act as a subcontractor to the provider for your particular apprenticeships. It's for organisations that, as I said, only deliver to their own employees. If you think you want to deliver apprenticeships to employees of other organisations, this is not the route for you. So you cannot deliver to training to employees of other organisations that aren't part of your connected group. And if you plan to deliver less than £100,000 value of training in a particular funding year, then you don't have to apply to this particular route. Sorry, and I should say that for employer providers, if you go down this route, you won't apply on the Digital Apprenticeship Service as an organisation to be selected for apprenticeship training. It's only those who go through the main route who will appear on the service. So the supporting route then, so this is for organisations that only want to deliver as a subcontractor, perhaps are new to the apprenticeship market and want to build up some expertise before they can then in future years apply to the main route, or don't have the capacity to deliver large-scale programmes. And it's for organisations who are expecting to deliver only up to £500,000 of training in a particular year, and you cannot deliver this directly to employers. So in this instance, if you're going through the supporting route, the organisations here will not have a contract direct with the employer. They will have a contract with the main provider, who in turn will have a contract with the employer. One of the things that's also come out in the documentation that we released earlier this week, if you're only delivering a small amount of training, or a relatively small amount of training, less than £100,000 in a year, then as a subcontractor, then you don't have to apply. But remember, the £100,000 means for all of the training that you're doing, that you're drawing down funds, which could be for multiple employers or for main providers. So if you're interested in applying and thinking about whether this is right for you, some of the things that you need to think about is, are you actually going to be delivering apprenticeship training? If you're just a broker, then you can't apply through the Register of Apprenticeship Training Providers. This is for people who are actually delivering apprenticeship training. You need to be trading as a business for at least 3 months, so new merged organisations might have an issue with that. You need to think about that, because we need to see some trading history to be able to get you on the register. If you've been awarded an Ofsted Grade 4 for effectiveness of apprenticeship training provision within the last 3 years, then you're not eligible to come onto the register. You need to wait for 3 years beyond that point. And if you've been awarded an Ofsted Grade 4 for your overall effectiveness within the last 3 years, you can only apply to the register if you've got a Grade 3 for your apprenticeship provision. So obviously what we're trying to do is to make sure that we've got good quality organisations available for delivering apprenticeships. And you also need to complete a financial health assessment. And again, I'm going to come on to that in a moment. So if you're interested in applying, please look at the information that was published. There's some quite detailed instructions available, and it is worth investing time in this if you're going to apply, because the last thing you want to do is be rejected because you haven't followed some basic instructions. You will need to have a number from the UK Register of Learning Providers, and to be on the Skills Funding Agency's procurement portal, which is called Bravo, and you'll need to apply online, so you need to get all of your material available for that. So you need your UK provider reference number, and you need to enter that in terms of the register. You'll also need to have your registration number with Information Commissioner's Office to enter onto the system. And in terms of the compliance questions, you may need to provide some more information there, and we'll be looking at what other assurances we've got if we think you're a significant risk organisation. In terms of financial health, you do need to complete this, but there are some exemptions from the financial health assessment. So the types of organisations which are exempt include local authorities, general FE colleges, higher education institutes which are funded by HEFCE, and organisations with a large turnover where you've already got published accounts which we can access. Again, please look at the guidance that's come out there. It'll make clear to you whether or not you need to complete all of the details of the financial health assessment or whether you are exempt for that. If you do need to complete it, you need to complete the information with your latest financial information and to upload your financial statements. And then we will check that information. In terms of capacity and capability, a couple of things to be aware of. So obviously you need to think about how you're safeguarding apprentices, particularly obviously if these are younger apprentices you're going to be training, and need to be aware of the prevent strategy. So this is making sure that individuals aren't subject to extremism or getting involved in that activity. You also need to think about how you're complying with the Equality Act. You should be doing that in any case in your organisations, and thinking about obviously your apprenticeship training offer, the expertise of your staff and your ability to deliver the particular apprenticeships that you're talking about in terms of your application. There'll be a number of statements you need to fill in. You need to fill those in fully. You can't refer to links elsewhere. You need to provide those in terms of the register itself. Some top tips, if you like, common mistakes that we find. So you need to make sure you've actually read the instructions. I'm sorry, I know it sounds really trite, but unfortunately sometimes people don't read the instructions. Again, if you're subject to financial health assessment, you do need to upload financial statements. Check your application and give yourself a bit of time to do that. Again, when we've had previous registered deadlines, we find a lot of people loading stuff at the very last minute, haven't checked it's complete, and then that means it's rejected, and obviously that's not what we want to happen for you. So as I do, be mindful of the deadline. The deadline is 5 p.m. on the 25th of November. We will not accept any late applications. There will be future opportunities to apply to the register, but for this opening to be ready for May next year, so it's the 25th of November at 5 o'clock. So do start looking at the information, getting registered on the tendering portal. And that's important as well, because if we're releasing any further information that's of relevance, that's the mechanism that we will use to communicate to people who might be interested in it. One of the other things to bear in mind is if you're going through the main apprenticeship route, you will need to provide us with information on your apprenticeship offer so we can show that to organisations, employers who are accessing the digital apprenticeship service. You may have already done this. If you have, just make sure your information is regularly updated as we get closer to May next year. But this will give employers information to select you as an appropriate apprenticeship training provider. So in terms of the timeline, so we launched on the 25th of October this week. We close on the 25th of November, and then we will be able to announce by March both who's been successful in terms of the register application and organisations which have got through the procurement. So I think we're expecting that in early March we will be able to tell people who's been successful in the register, and a week or so later those who've got through the procurement exercise, which I'm going to talk to just for a minute or two before I finish. So in terms of the procurement, just to reiterate, if you're interested in the procurement, this is to have a contract direct with the Skills Funding Agency for non-levy provisions, so particularly for smaller employers. You need to both apply to the main application route and complete the invitation to tender. Both processes run in parallel. In terms of the contracts which the Skills Funding Agency will give to you, those contracts will run from the 1st of May 2017 to 31st of July 2018. Depending when non-levied paying employers come onto the digital apprenticeship service, there is scope for those contracts to be extended further, but we don't have the date for that yet, but that's just something to bear in mind. And in terms of the procurement, this is what to look out for in terms of the tendering portal. So that's the reference number that you will need to apply for it. And then you need to upload all of your information to the system. So in terms of further information, I direct you to gov.uk, to this particular collection of documents that has everything you need there, and then also the guidance documents which are there available through the tendering portal as well. Specific information on the procurement will be available on Contracts Finder as well for you. So there is quite a lot of information. So please do have a look at it if you're interested. I realise you've only got a month to complete stuff, so quite a lot of work to do for many of you over that period. Okay, I'm going to stop there. I'm sure you're tired of hearing from me. Thank you very much.
Go and sit down. Una, that was brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. I think you deserve a sit down now for having been on your feet for 50 minutes, but a really useful overview and some really quite interesting things, and certainly I think you've set us a task in the sector for quite a lot of work over the next 4 weeks. We're now going into questions, and hopefully, yes, I can see people wandering with microphones, which is really good. I'm going to take Chairman's prerogative, and I'm going to ask the first question just whilst people think about what they want to ask. There's one thing that you've said today that I'd just like you to be absolutely clear on, and that's one of the, if you like, criteria that would bar somebody from being on the register of apprenticeship providers. And that concerns Ofsted grade. Now, if I heard you correctly, essentially, anybody who over the last 3 years has had an inadequate, and I'm talking about inadequate overall, including their apprenticeship provision, would not be eligible to apply for the register.
If you have got a grade 3 for your apprenticeship provision, you would be able to apply to the register. Okay. But if it's a 4 for your apprenticeship provision, you would not. Precisely. Yeah.
The scenario that's in my head, and it happens from time to time, is that somebody could have had an Ofsted 3 years ago or 2 years, 10 months ago, and be declared inadequate. They could have been revisited by Ofsted at some point in that intervening 2 year, 10-month period and now be good, even. That happens. So is it their most recent Ofsted in that scenario that would count? In other words, in that scenario, would they be eligible or not?
Yes, so obviously it is the most recent Ofsted grade that we're looking at, yes.
Okay, that's useful clarification. Thank you very much. Right, I always find it difficult to see questions here, so please wave and shout at me. Mr. Marsh, you can have the pleasure of going first.
Hi, thank you. Richard Marsh at Kaplan. Thank you both for the really interesting presentations. Una, I just had 2 points of quick clarification around levy payers, if you can answer them. On the first one is in the documents that came out on Tuesday, in the kind of overall summary cover document, it says quite early on that employers will be able to set and agree a payment profile with their providers. But then on the Estimate My Levy system and in the draft funding rules, it seems to say that there will be a flat funding profile and that they won't be able to, choose a payment profile with their providers. And the other question was, on the Estimate system as well, which I think is really helpful, it lets you spend more than your levy, as you did with your example. And I just wondered, if an employer spends more than their levy amount, does the provider get that funding from their allocation, and in which case does it need to not warn the employer, or be careful if you go over, please check with your provider first that they've got that money available. So it was just one is the payment profile set for everybody, which I think it is, and secondly, where does the money come from if an employer goes over their levy and wants to spend more? Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Richard.
Thanks, Richard. So if we've got some confusing wording in some of the documentation, I think we need to correct that. So yes, to make it clear, the payment profile is set. So as I said earlier on, that we will pay monthly to the provider through the expected period of the apprenticeship. So we calculate effectively 80% of the estimated cost, and we divide that monthly through the period that the apprenticeship is being delivered, and that's what will go to the provider once the employer said the apprenticeship can start, and then the final 20% being paid at completion. In terms of your second question, so if a levy-paying employer is using more than is in their digital account, no, that does not come from the provider's allocation. Effectively, that funding is unlimited, so that they can continue to deliver the apprenticeship programme they have. The only limitation, of course, is that the employer has to pay 10% of the remaining balance that would be due to the training provider.
That's really helpful, thank you. Lady here at the front. Sorry, that's brilliant. Thank you very much. Sorry, I should have said, when you ask a question, can you say who you are and from whence you come, please?
Yep, Angela Middleton at Middleton Murray. Thanks very much for that overview. It's fantastically clear now, so that's good. A couple of questions though. Firstly, the estimated timeline for new standards start to finish. I've been talking to quite a lot of large businesses who are keen to get involved and come up with new standards. And the other thing for Una is, are there any guidelines or going to be any guidelines for the employers in terms of the percentage of their levy that needs to go for new young entrants into the business as opposed to existing staff? Because I've been asked that question too.
Okay, thank you. In terms of how quickly standards can be developed, it's entirely up to the employer group. So the pace is set by them, so it can range from 6 months to 2 years. So the ideal thing to do is, if they are looking to develop something, is to diary the time in, because it's voluntary time. So it is at their own pace. We don't actually drive quickness, because it's got to be right.
Is there an average time frame? Because some have taken quite a long time, I think.
Some do take a long time. It depends on how quickly groups meet. Like I say, if they don't diary the time in, people kind of lose interest sometimes because it's kind of taking forever. But it is up to the employers. Average 6 months.
Can I just ask, is there a sort of an SLA or an agreement in terms of time frame for coming back once they've submitted standards for approval?
No, there isn't, but we are starting to kind of look at times now. So if something's been in and sat there for 2 years and nothing's happened, we are talking to those groups. But on average, we are hoping within 12 months the standard and assessment plans are ready.
Okay, sorry, and I've just forgotten already your question.
Sorry, it was about,
I think it was about the proportion of 16 to 18-year-olds. No, so, I mean, because we recognise that this is about employers and the training needs of their particular workforce, so government isn't planning to set targets for the percentage of 16 to 18-year-olds or to set any targets about what they're spending their funding on, because, again, circumstances can differ a lot. You might be in an organisation, we've got a high turnover of staff, and therefore lots of your apprentices are going to be new. But in other organisations, actually, your challenge is more about retraining your workforce. So again, it would be quite appropriate in those organisations to spend your levy on retraining those staff.
Great, thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Angela, for your question. Gentleman right at the back. So I'm keeping the microphone people fit. Can you just keep your hand up, sir, so that we can... Lovely, thank you very much.
Hello, Dan Pearson, MTC. You mentioned for levy-paying employers, 20% is held back for completion. Is that also the case for the non-levy?
Yes, it is. So the 20% is held back no matter what the apprenticeship is funded by, so whether it's from digital funds or from government co-investment. So in all cases, 20% completion payment is paid at the end of the apprenticeship. Okay, and so if the employer pays their 10% fully up front, does that mean that for non-levy payers that the payment is also paid up front less than 20% that's being held back? So we will only pay the provider the monthly amount that we've calculated through the apprenticeship, regardless of when the employer pays their 10%. What is in the funding rules that have been released is we expect that training providers must collect that 10% at least quarterly, but what they do beyond that is up to them and the employer. But we will only release payments to the training provider through the apprenticeship, and that includes the 20%, which I said will be paid at the end.
Okay, thank you.
And can I ask a supplementary to that? What about the money that you need to keep back for the endpoint assessment process, which might be 15% fairly typically? In terms of managing the money here, do you effectively then, it would be for standards, have to keep 35% back?
Well, we would normally expect that the 20% that's been held back for completion would cover the cost of endpoint assessment.
So that includes the endpoint assessment cost,
yes,
right?
It
okay,
is. I mean, obviously what the training provider and the employer will need to agree is how that's contracted for and paid for at the end. But the completion payment is to recognise two things. One is we want to obviously encourage apprentices to complete apprenticeships successfully, but it's also to recognise that for standards there is a cost at the end.
Thank you, Una. That's fine. Lovely, thank you. Gentleman in the white shirt there. Yes. Then I'll come to this gentleman here afterwards, please.
Graham Hastings-Evans. I'm from NOCN, and we're an apprenticeship assessment organisation, and it's a follow-on question. And it's been a great presentation, so thank you very much. All the standards and assessment plans that have been developed have got gateways in them. So I guess the intention is to try and ensure we get very high pass rates. But if somebody doesn't pass and the 20% has been paid, and the person needs to do some more training and sit yet another 10 or 15% EPA session, will employers be able to reclaim that extra money from their levy pot?
So with any apprenticeship, the cap is effectively the funding band limit. Yeah. So it will depend really on what price has been negotiated beforehand. So if the original price was below the funding band and there were more funds available, then we could take an updated price from the employer and the training provider that recognised the fact there were some more costs there. But in many cases, actually, it'll be that the employer is going to have to meet that cost.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Gentleman down.
Hi, Phil Dack from Serena Russo Institute. We are apprenticeship subcontractor here in the UK, but we support about 37,000 apprentices in Australia, so we operate on 2 levels. Now, you whizzed through quite quickly, so I may not have quite understood, but were you suggesting that the support line in the procurement is for organisations who would subcontract £500,000 or less, and the main line is for organisations who obviously want to deliver directly under the apprenticeship levy, but you can only go down one route? So does that preclude organisations going in as a main and a support to give themselves a backup option?
So organisations can only go in as one route, but if you went in the main route, then you can act as a subcontractor for another apprenticeship, but it's only one route that you can actually do. So yes, you could be delivering apprenticeships direct for an employer. You could be using, if you were successful through the procurement, you could be also delivering through the SFA contract for that. You could be acting as a subcontractor to another main provider.
But if you don't get through on the main route, you don't have the option to submit as the support route to provide yourself as a backup option?
You can only apply at one time to that. I guess you'd need to then think, if you were unsuccessful first time round, what you would do in the future. But for the register, you can only apply for one route at a time.
Okay, thank you very much. Gentleman here.
Umar, it's a related question really, and that refers to the definition of a main provider. I was talking to somebody the other day who was saying, let's consider, for example, a major supermarket chain who might want to do a whole range of different apprenticeships, and who decide, in fact, that they actually want to use 2 or 3 different providers for different apprenticeship programs that they're going to run. Does that mean that they could actually then contract with each of those three separate organisations directly, or would one of them have to operate as a main prime contractor and the others as subcontractors?
It depends very much on what they're actually trying to do. So, for example, if the supermarket, they could contract with a provider for, say, their accountancy apprenticeships, and they could contract with another provider for their customer service apprenticeships. That's perfectly possible to do. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Gentleman here in the blue tie.
Thank you. Colin Gordon, System Group. Just a couple of questions for Una. The first one is looking at the funding bands. There are concerns that an effective apprenticeship cannot be delivered within the designated band. So will there be a review mechanism available to providers to challenge those bands as we go forward?
So the mechanism for challenging funding bands for standards is for employers to challenge. So we talk regularly to employer groups as part of the approval process. So what happens is we set an initial funding band, and then we get more information through from the employers as they're talking to training providers about the costs of delivery. And in some cases then we will revisit that initial band. So we get something which both the employers and ourselves think is appropriate for that particular apprenticeship. So if you've got an issue with a particular funding band, you would need to get the support of your employer group, but we would need clear evidence that it's eligible costs of training which are pushing up the costs of delivery. We get a lot of applications through where there are lots of costs which just aren't eligible for funding.
Okay, thank you for that. And the second part was just more a follow-up to, I think, the first question that was asked, which was about levy-paying employers having to contribute more once they've used up their levy. I don't know whether you mentioned or not, but where does that additional money come from? Is that additional government budget, or is it from underspend from other levy, levy users?
Yes, so the whole apprenticeship programme is being funded from the levy that's been contributed by those employers who are subject to it. So yes, the other apprenticeships are being funded either for non-levy paying employers or for levy payers who haven't sufficient amounts in the digital account. So yes, so it's the total levy pot is funding all apprenticeships, no matter what the individual arrangements are for a particular employer.
So there is a finite pot that at some stage an employer could be told, no, there's no more money left in the pot.
In theory, that's possible, but actually, if you look at the amounts of funding that are being raised through the levy, and that was published in August, there is substantially more money going into apprenticeships over the term of the Parliament. So certainly we don't expect that to be an issue, not in the first few years. And I guess we'll need to review how successful the programme is and what that means in future years. But certainly in the early years, I don't think that should be a concern for anybody.
Okay, thank you very much. Next two questions, gentleman at the back and lady who's waving furiously at me over here. So.
Steve Lawrence, EVT. Slight confusion in my head with reference the endpoint assessment and where it says in the employer's levy draft guidance that the person would have to finish the apprenticeship before the endpoint apprenticeship assessment takes place, whereas before you were arranging that prior to the end of the timescale. My point there is someone could be on for 18 months, but they can't then actually finish until the end point assessment. If the timescale is, say, a year, then the end point can't take place before that year.
Sorry, I'm not quite sure I follow the question.
Right, in the guidance, in the draft guidance for levy payers, it states you must not do the endpoint assessment until the end of the specified time for that apprenticeship.
Yes, so that's correct. So all apprenticeships must last at least 12 months. And in many cases, standards specify that apprenticeships need to be longer than that. and therefore the minimum time that's specified in the standard is the time that the apprenticeship needs to be on programme. Now, of course, it could vary, and an individual could actually take longer than the minimum time. And it's only at the point where both the employer and the provider are saying this individual is ready to take the endpoint assessment, does that go ahead? And therefore, that's the point at which you expect the endpoint assessment actually to be paid for.
Yeah, my point was the other guidance sort of says that it would be arranged at, say, 10 month or 11 month, that the person was ready to take it. And my point there is you could have a month or 2 month delay with the endpoint assessment because, one, you haven't got the assessment organisations, or the timescales would go on. So therefore the person wouldn't have the money, if that makes sense, coming through for the payments. So
in terms of when the endpoint assessment needs to be arranged, I guess that's between the employer and provider to decide when. We certainly need at least an estimate at the beginning of what the costs are likely to be. In terms of the completion payment, it's only paid when the individual has actually taken the endpoint assessment. So the employer and the provider need to take that into consideration in thinking about what funds are going to go out of their digital account if they're paying the levy, or if the employer is having to pay the 10% co-investment.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Una. Lady over there, please.
Hello, my name's Heather Porter and I'm from Nottinghamshire Healthcare Trust. I think you're going to be fed up with this 20% and all the questions that surround it. Within our health communities in Nottinghamshire, we have a lot of people that start applying for jobs around halfway through their apprenticeships and are usually successful in getting them within that, before the year's up. So as a health community, we're wondering around the funding of the endpoint assessment, should that happen, so that they're actually working for a different employer and maybe have a different training provider. Because we do have an arrangement that if people change trust, they can still continue in their MVQ framework currently. But obviously there's now a cost attachment to it, so it's kind of how do we get around that if they want to take a job before the end of the programme?
Okay, so it will be possible for individual apprentices to change employers through the programme. Then the funding will need to be looked at depending on the circumstances of the new employer. But it'd be then for the new employer to take on whatever costs are still need to be paid for the training and the assessment. And again, depending on when that change happens, it will have implications for some of the additional payments, which I talked about in my presentation as well. But obviously what we're keen to do, that as much as possible people can complete their apprenticeships, but they would need to overall, comply with the minimum duration and be able to continue to have that training. But it'll be for the new employer to set up an arrangement with the provider to continue the training for the particular individual.
No, that happens. It's just around the payments for different trusts, because we're all drawing it down separately, aren't we?
Yes, so in that case it would be for the new employer, and they're using their digital funds to pay for the remaining of the training for the individual apprentice.
Yeah, it's just that all our communities in Nottinghamshire are wondering how it's going to work, but it's just pitched into the pot, so thank you.
Okay, thank you. Gentleman over there, then lady over there.
Hello, Noel Dunn, Creative Alliance. It's a question on the clarification, really, of prior learning, and particularly the status of graduates. I was talking to a senior manager of a large advertising and marketing agency who will be paying the levy, whose interpretation is that they're not going to have to do anything different. They'll be able to recruit English graduates and put them through a level 4 digital marketing qualification. I'm not so certain that's the case, but it would be very helpful to get some clarification on this prior achievement.
So potentially that is eligible for funding in the new system. What the individual employer and the training provider will need to look at is whether it meets the test. So this is something that's substantially different to the individual has done before, that they need significant training, so it needs to meet all of the criteria for the individual apprenticeship. But obviously what we want to make sure it's still a quality programme, and it's still something that's recognised as it's a substantial period of learning for the individual. But I say it's for the employer and the provider to work together to see whether it meets the test that we've applied within the funding rules.
And so basically the employer and provider can decide that. There will be no other outside agency if there is a concern or a dispute. I mean, where is the clarification sought from that?
So, as we've given some guidance within the funding rules. I think it is probably an area we're going to issue some further technical guidance to people, because I know a number of people have been asking questions about this. We will also then, when the provider is being audited by the Skills Funding Agency, and if it's the employer provider, it's one of the things that we would look at in terms of whether or not this looks like a genuine programme or not. And obviously, if we thought there was a doubt about that, then funding could be reclaimed.
Okay, thank you. I mean, clearly there are potentially areas of greyness here, aren't there, where it gets very difficult as to whether that's substantially different or not. But okay, that's really interesting. Thank you. Lady here at the front, thank you very much.
Diane Musker from Eddie Stobart. My question is about the register, which I think is fantastic news that we can see the Ofsted grading and the success rates. My concern is if we engage with training providers now and they don't make the register and that's not published till March, what happens?
So for organisations that are on the current register of training organisations, there isn't any guarantee that they'll get on the new register of apprenticeship training providers. We would expect that many of them will, because these are organisations which have a good track record. It is a risk that if you get involved with a training provider now, they may not end up on the register of apprenticeship training providers, and I'm sorry, that's just the situation we are now in, and it is only in March next year will you know precisely who's involved. But as I say, we do expect many of the existing providers will appear on the new register. I'm afraid that's all the assurance I can give you at the moment.
Is there anything you can do now? I mean, I know that success rates are looking at Ofsted and that's my benchmark, but...
We can't tell you at the moment who's going to be successful. We don't actually know who's going to apply yet, and it will take some time. And I said, it is only, I'm afraid, in March we'll be able to confirm. I guess it'll be for you to do due diligence with the particular providers you're interested in, to talk to them about their particular circumstance and where they think they are, and what they're planning to do going forward. I'm sorry, it's just we won't have the definitive information available to March. I realise that poses some difficulties for both employers and training providers, but I'm afraid that's the situation we're in.
Okay, we'll move on. Thank you for that. Lady at the back and then Kay. So lady at the back, sorry to have kept you waiting. You need to wave more at me.
Hi, I'm Anne Potterton. I'm from the Institute of Telecoms Professionals. My question's also about the register. A lot of people here are already training providers, but my question's about people who are not currently training providers but want to enter into it. Therefore, I understand that they've got to apply to the register. What I've maybe missed, which is quite possible, it's quite a lot to read, is this piece about procurement. So have people who currently do not do apprenticeship training but want to and feel they've got the capability, etc., they apply to be on the register, but do they also have to procure a contract? Have I missed something?
So the procuring a contract comes in for organisations that want to deliver apprenticeship training to employers that are not paying the levy.
Which would be the case.
If you're in that circumstance and you want to have a contract with the Skills Funding Agency for apprenticeships for non-levied employers, then yes, you need to both apply for the register and go through the procurement. And I said those processes are running in parallel.
So you can do them at the same time?
So you can do it at the same time. In fact, you need to do it at the same time because the closing date is the same. So the closing date for both the register and the procurement is on the 25th of November. And you'll need to provide all of the information which I talked about earlier as part of the process, both for the register and for the procurement.
But if you were only going to deliver to levy-paying employers, you wouldn't need to?
So if you're only going to deliver to levy-paying employers, you only need to apply to the register.
Okay.
But to be selected by a levy-paying employer, you need to go through the main route, and then you would appear on the digital service for an employer to select you.
Brilliant.
Okay, I'm going to move on. Just a couple more questions. I'm conscious of time. Kay, you're next, and then I'll take one more.
Hi, Kay Butterfield from Leeds Teaching Hospital. One point of clarification regarding you mentioned about holding back the 20% that includes completing and endpoint assessment. So are you saying on that it is only maximum 20% we can pay for the endpoint assessments? That was the first question.
We're not saying that that's the maximum. However, the guidance is we would expect it to be no more than 20%. Because we think otherwise it's not good value in terms of an apprenticeship programme. And in most cases we are seeing endpoint assessment coming in below 20% of the total cost of the apprenticeship. But it's not a hard and fast piece, but we have challenged some apprenticeships which have come forward for funding where there is a very high proportion of endpoint assessment to say that isn't good value for money, and we haven't set funding bands for those. So
from an employer's point of view, because I have to say we are being given the indication that endpoint assessment is going to cost us more than 20% within the funding bands of a number of our health qualifications. So where do we as employers challenge that back? So
I think that's a conversation you should have with the endpoint assessor organisation. What value are you getting from the assessment? Now, assessment can be an expensive business depending on the type of programme. Bhavina wants to come in here.
Yeah, I mean, the training, when the employers draft the assessment plans, they will hopefully be talking to assessment organisations, and as Una says, majority are coming in under, and it's about agreeing that price right up front as part of the big programme calculations. And each assessment plan does actually have the percentage in there, so if your endpoint assessment organisation is asking for more, you can actually question that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
The second question, was to do with as trusts, there'll be certain elements that we will probably need to deliver because the training providers can't do certain elements of it, and we'll be looking to actually recover some costs. So, and we're trying to do things collectively as organisations. So we're right, am I understanding that each of us as NHS trusts could actually have that of a value of 100,000 for each of the trusts? Is that right?
I think it's could an NHS trust apply in a supporting role on the apprenticeship register and deliver part of the apprenticeship?
Yes, so they could deliver part of the apprenticeship, but only up to a maximum of 100,000 across all of the different providers they might be working with.
Without being on any of the registers?
Without being on the register, yes.
Thank you,
Good.
That's great.
Okay, I'm going to have one more question. That's a gentleman here on the front table, please. Thank you, sir.
Hi, I'm from Total Training. My name is Ashok. Now, we deliver apprenticeships basically into the construction industry, and with the endpoint assessment, it has to be strictly under the CITB guidelines. But are we allowed to choose the endpoint assessors, the assessment organizations ourselves, or will it be specified by the SFA or the employer to ensure that standards are maintained? That's my question.
The employer will select the endpoint assessment organisation from the register that the SFA is holding. So they will select who they want to work with. So it can't be, CITB don't really have a say in it. It's employer choice as to which provider they work with and which endpoint assessment organisation they work with.
But I should make clear that for individual standards, when an assessment organisation applies, they say which standards they are suitable to deliver the endpoint assessment. So you would be able to look at however many there are that could deliver the endpoint assessment for the particular standard you're interested in.
Okay, thank you, sir, and thank you for that. Now, it wouldn't be me, Una, if I didn't push things slightly to the limit. I recognise that we are in a procurement process now, so there is possibly very little you can say, and you may not even be able to answer this question. But I'm one of the sad people who've read the specification for the procurement process. And tucked away on page 18, and it's paragraph 81, says that the maximum allocation that a provider will be given if they're successful is £5 million. Now, my question is, we all know there are colleges and private training providers who currently have apprenticeship contracts for substantially more than £5 million. Is in any sense, or do we know whether that £5 million is in any way negotiable, or how does a provider that, say, currently has a £30 million a year apprenticeship contract manage within that £5 million confine?
I don't think I can go into the detail of this. What I can say to you is that obviously going forward we're in a very different world. So a lot of apprenticeship funding is being directed by employers who are paying the levy. What we are also not certain of at this point is how much of the proportion of effectively the total pot are those employers going to be using. And depending on what's happening with that, then there would be potentially more funding available for non-levy paying employers. That's probably all I can say at the moment.
I thought I'd try, but thank you very much for that. That's a great answer, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, can we show our appreciation for Una and Bavina for that?